Scorpio doesn't stop at the surface. From the very first moment of a connection, a conversation, or a new situation, its energy goes straight to what lies underneath. Not because it's naturally suspicious, but because staying on the surface feels almost impossible. There's something in that way of perceiving the world that can't be switched off. A kind of emotional radar that picks up on tension before anyone says a word. That reads what others are keeping quiet. That senses what's really at stake, even when nobody names it. Scorpio is the eighth sign of the zodiac. It belongs to the water element, which connects it to the emotional world, intuition, and inner depth. But unlike Cancer or Pisces, which are also water signs, Scorpio has a fixed modality. That means its energy tends to hold steady, to go deeper, to not move easily from what it has decided to feel, believe, or protect. This combination of water and fixity produces something distinct, an intensity that doesn't dissolve or scatter, but concentrates, turns inward, and can sustain very complex emotional processes with surprising strength. In traditional astrology, Scorpio is associated with Mars, the planet of desire, drive, and direct action. In modern astrology, it's also linked to Pluto, which represents deep transformation, cycles of destruction and regeneration, what stays hidden and what rises again after a crisis. Both of these influences show up in the way Scorpio moves through life, with an energy that desires, that confronts when necessary, that isn't afraid of dark places, and that can go through internal changes most people would avoid looking at altogether. That ability to look deeply is one of its greatest strengths. Scorpio can sit with discomfort, hold difficult conversations, and stay present with someone in the middle of a crisis without flinching from their pain. People with this energy prominent in their birth chart often have an almost instinctive ability to get to the core of a problem, to see what's hiding behind a behavior, to understand dynamics that others simply don't notice. It isn't magic or manipulation. It's a sensitivity that's been tuned toward what goes unsaid. In relationships, Scorpio can love with a depth that few other energies in the zodiac match. When it trusts, it gives itself fully. When it becomes emotionally invested in someone, that connection occupies a real place, not a decorative one. It looks for genuine connection, not surface-level exchange. It needs to know that what it's building with another person has substance, honesty, and real intimacy. The same is true in friendship. Scorpio doesn't usually have a wide circle, but the connections it does have tend to be deep, lasting, and chosen with care. It's the kind of energy that remembers what matters to the people it loves, that shows up during hard times, that doesn't leave when things get complicated. But that same intensity that makes it so present and so loyal can also become a challenge. Scorpio tends to need to feel safe in a relationship before it opens up completely. And while it's assessing that safety, it might watch, test, or stay quieter than it should. It doesn't always do this consciously. It's more of an internal response. If something feels off, if the other person doesn't seem fully transparent, if there's any hint of possible betrayal, the emotional door closes. And once that door closes, it can be hard to open again. In romantic relationships, this plays out differently depending on how self-aware the person is. Scorpio can confuse love with intensity, devotion with possession, care with control. Not because it wants to cause harm, but because its need for real connection can get tangled up with the fear of losing what matters to it. When that part of itself hasn't been worked through, it can become jealous without real cause, can read normal distance as abandonment, can respond from old wounds instead of from what's actually happening right now. Learning to tell those two things apart, what's really occurring versus what fear is projecting, is one of the most important pieces of growth for this energy. When it comes to communication, Scorpio tends to be more observer than talker, especially at first. It listens, analyzes, takes note. When it decides to speak, it usually has something specific to say. It doesn't tend to waste time on empty conversation. But when something affects it emotionally, the opposite can happen. It holds too much in, lets things build, and then everything comes out with a force that catches people around it off guard. The challenge isn't the intensity of feeling, that's simply part of its nature. The challenge is finding ways to express what it's carrying before it reaches a breaking point. At work, Scorpio has a remarkable ability to focus, to go deep on a subject, to investigate, and to stay with a process even when it gets difficult. When something genuinely matters to it, it can bring a sustained energy that doesn't wear down easily. It has a talent for reading the dynamics of a team or an organization, for understanding what motivates people, for identifying what's going unsaid in a room, but that everyone can feel. It can work well under pressure and hold space for projects that involve transformation, crisis, or real complexity. The difficulty shows up when intensity tips into obsession, when it needs absolute control over a process, or when any shift in direction feels like a threat. Scorpio's relationship with discipline is particular. It can be extraordinarily persistent when something genuinely matters, when there's a goal that connects to real desire and something deeper than routine. But if the objective doesn't feel meaningful, if the path seems hollow or shallow, sustaining the rhythm becomes much harder. It needs what it does to carry weight, to have a purpose that goes beyond appearances. When it finds that, it can be one of the most consistent and committed energies in the zodiac. In conflict, Scorpio can move in two directions. It can engage directly with a sharpness that cuts straight to the point, or it can pull back into silence and observe from a distance while it decides how to respond. What's hard for it is treating disagreement as something normal, as something that doesn't imply betrayal or threat. It tends to take conflict personally, even when it isn't. Learning to distinguish between a genuine difference of opinion and a real attack is meaningful growth work for this energy. When Scorpio is in balance, it's deep, loyal, perceptive, committed, and brave enough to look at what others prefer to avoid. It has the capacity to transform itself, to recognize what no longer works, and to let go even when it hurts, because it understands that there's life on the other side of change. In that place, it's one of the most present, most honest, and most trustworthy connections there is. Under pressure, that same energy can turn controlling, overly guarded, suspicious without real cause, possessive, reactive, or stuck in emotions it can't seem to move through. It can stay too long with a wound, circling it, unable to find a way out, because letting go feels like surrender. And surrender doesn't come easily to this energy. Scorpio carries something essential in its nature about what it really means to transform. Not the decorative kind of transformation, not a change in form that leaves the inside untouched, but the kind of process that requires looking directly at what hurts, acknowledging what can no longer stay the same, and moving through that discomfort without turning away. That capacity is valuable and necessary, and it's no coincidence that people going through genuinely hard times often find in someone with Scorpio energy a presence that can be there without getting scared off. But Scorpio's maturity also comes from understanding that trusting someone doesn't mean becoming defenseless. That opening emotionally doesn't mean giving up power. That armor can protect, but it can also keep out exactly what it needs most. The intensity that defines this sign doesn't disappear with growth. It sharpens. It learns to move toward what it's building rather than toward what it's defending. And in that shift, transformation stops being just a response to crisis and becomes a way of living with more presence, more trust, and more freedom inside.